Happy Friday and good morning. It is July 4th, 2025. Happy Independence Day to the USA. Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the city speaks loudest. Start your Friday mornings plugged into the heartbeat of the world. Urban Pulse Global is your 8 a.m. power surge, curating today's top stories from the New York Times, the Caribbean via CARICOM, and Africa via Africa News. From Brooklyn to Bridgetown to Bamako, we bring a streetwise spin to global headlines, connecting urban voices across continents. One podcast, 3 continents, all the pulse. Broadcasting every Friday at 8 a.m. Today, July 4, 2025, in a world overflowing with headlines, one podcast dares to cut through the noise and deliver the real rhythm of the globe, one urban heartbeat at a time. Introducing the Urban Pulse Global Podcast, a dynamic weekly news show airing every Friday morning at 8 a.m. where city streets, cultural beats, and global voices collide. Where the city speaks loudest isn't just a tagline, it's our truth. Urban Pulse Global dives into the day's top stories pulled straight from the New York Times, Caribbean News via CARICOM, and continental developments from via AfricaNews.com. From the bustling boroughs of New York to the vibrant communities of Kingston, Accra, and beyond, we bring you a streetwise, unfiltered view of the news that shapes our lives. Hosted by a sharp and spirited voice rooted in real-world experience, Urban Pulse Global simply reports the news. It does not interpret it, but connects it and pulses it with rhythm and relevance. Our aim to keep you informed and highlight the global ties that bind our urban worlds together. Whether you're on your morning commute, sipping coffee, or powering through your workday, Urban Pulse Global is the perfect way to plug in, catch up, and stay aware globally. Thank you for staying with us every Friday at 8 a.m. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in the pulse. Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the city speaks loudest. Let's now go over to the New York Times. I just want to share something with you from The Guardian. I found this so interesting from The Guardian this morning. This 4th of July, the world declares its independence from America. That's by Stephen Marsh. The lessons the Americans once taught the British, they are teaching the rest of the world. There are no permanent global orders. I found that interesting. I thought I'd share it. Okay, let's go over to the New York Times. All the news that's fit to print. And in today's weather, today will be sunny, not as warm, low humidity, high 84. And tonight will be mainly clear, low 68. And for tomorrow, there will be sun, some high clouds, warm, not too humid, with a high of 87. The weather map can be seen on page B12. So the main headline on the New York Times today's paper reads, Trump policy bill clears Congress. Before I go forward, I don't want a mistake like the last time, so let me just check to make sure everything is okay with the broadcast. Thank you so much for being here. You're listening to Urban Pulse Global Podcast. Awesome. All is well. So let's go on. So the major headline in today's today's paper for the New York Times reads, Trump policy bill clears Congress. And there's a photo on there for those who are not able to see. It reads, In God We Trust. And the caption reads, Speaker Mike Johnson bringing the House vote to a close on Thursday. The tally was 218 to 214, with all but 2 Republicans in favor. So you can see an image of the American flag, and they're in what is this place that they're inside of? Oh, the House, right. And if you'd like to see if you want to see the video for this podcast, just go to our YouTube page at Global Urban Media on YouTube. All right, so the first story we're going to look at is Democrats see a chance to win voters back. And this story is written by Annie and Reed. So demoralized Democrats, hang on here. Okay, so we're here. Demoralized Democrats who have denounced President Trump's sweeping domestic policy bill have landed on a silver lining. It is so unpopular with voters, they say, that it could win them back one, if not both, chambers of Congress in next year's midterm elections. Top officials in the party who see the bill as cruel, fiscally ruinous, and the single biggest wealth transfer in American history expect that they can blame Republicans who voted for the loss of healthcare coverage, nursing home care, and food security for millions of Americans in order to extend the 2017 tax cuts that favor the wealthy. And they have plenty of quotes from Republicans like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, denouncing their own bill that Democrats say will make the argument that much more potent. And here's a quote. There's going to be some powerful ads, said Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the chamber's Democratic leader, before rattling off potential scripts for advertisements that are set to begin airing as early as next week. My daughter had cancer. She was doing fine. Well, all of a sudden, her health care was blown up. I worked at this rural hospital for 30 years. I put my heart into it because I wanted to help people. I was fired. Stuff like that is going to really matter. It may take a while for people to feel the full effects of the bill because Republicans front-loaded some temporary tax cuts for working people, like no taxes on tips. That were engineered to appeal to working class voters. The cuts to Medicaid are not set up to be implemented until after the midterm elections, and that story continues on page A18, as you can see right here. All right, the next story that's on today's paper front page of the New York Times, it says, Quashing Revolt, GOP delivers his agenda. All right, so this article is by Michael Gold, Robert Jimison, and Megan Nero. The House on Thursday narrowly passed a sweeping bill to extend tax cuts and slash social safety net programs, capping Republicans' chaotic months-long slog to overcome deep rifts within their party and deliver President Trump's domestic agenda. The final vote, 2018 to 2014, based on the image I just spoke with you about, was mostly along party lines and came after Speaker Mike Johnson spent a frenzied day and night toiling to quell resistance in his ranks that threatened until the very end to derail the president's marquee legislation. With all but Republicans in favor and Democrats uniformly opposed, The action cleared the bill for Mr. Trump's signature, meeting the July 4th deadline, the July 4 deadline he had demanded. The legislation extends tax cuts enacted in 2017 that had been scheduled to expire at the end of the year, while adding new ones Mr. Trump promised during this campaign on some tips and overtime pay at a total cost of $4.5 trillion. It also increases funding for defense and border security and cuts nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid, with more reductions to food assistance for the poor and other government aid. And it phases out clean energy tax credits passed under former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. that Mr. Trump and conservative Republicans have long decried. This story continues on page A18. And a caption below this, another story below this says, hiring steady. The labor market showed strength despite uncertainty over tariffs. That story is on page B1. Another headline or another story on today's paper from the New York Times is offhand remark on gold bars secretly taped upends a life. Offhand remark on golden bars secretly taped upends a life. This story is by Lisa Friedman. They matched on Tinder shortly after the November presidential election, shared their mutual disappointment about Donald J. Trump's victory, and agreed to meet for a drink. Sitting at a table at Lich Cafe, a bar on Washington's U Street corridor, Brent Efron and his date Brady talked a bit about home and hobbies, but Brady, or at least that's the name he used, repeatedly steered the conversation back to Mr. Efron's job at the Environmental Protection Agency. And here's a quote: "It was a boring date," Mr. Efron, 29, recalled. He just wanted to talk about work. Brady took a particular interest in the fate of billions of dollars that Congress had ordered the EPA to spend on tracking climate change. Mr. Trump had promised on the campaign trail to repeal climate programs. So the Biden administration was trying to get the money out as fast as possible, Mr. Efron told his date. And this story continues on page A15. What's next on the front page? All right, so another story making the headlines: tariffs could render next year's 4th a dud. Chinese fireworks get more costly as US 250th nears. This story is by Alan Rappaport. President Trump may soon have to decide between his love of tariffs and his affections for fireworks. The Trump administration's trade policies have set off a frenzy of lobbying and exemptions, with industries across the economy raising alarm about how tariffs would crush their companies, raise prices for consumers, and lead to shortages of products. But as the July 4th holiday approaches, which is today, the pyrotechnics sector, which is heavily reliant on imports from China, has been increasingly loud about its concerns. The high prices are already straining the mom and pop fireworks shops that dot roadsides across rural America, and the budgets of cities and towns that put on splashy displays could soon be further stretched. But the bigger fear is 2026, as industry representatives warn that many of the festivities that are in the works to celebrate the nation's 250th birthday could be diminished or even go dark. And here's a quote: "It's really the next year that's worrying us with the manufacturing and what tariffs will do," said Stacy S. Blake, the president of the National Fireworks Association and co-owner of Schnitter Fireworks and Importing in Missouri. Wow, fireworks are a $2 billion industry in the United States, and about 99% of the fireworks that light up the skies across America come from China. And that story continues on page 19. And there's a photo right here. It says Kadrin Spillman 8 and his grandfather Joe Kolobsky at Schnitter Fireworks and Importing. So it's a picture of the man and the young boy in the store. Okay, and now the next story that's on the New York Times front page. Abuse isn't same as racketeering. How Combs fended off the gravest charges. And this story is by Julia and Ben. Over 28 days of testimony, federal prosecutors called witnesses who gave compelling accounts of harrowing violence, acts of intimidation, and voyeuristic sex in hotel rooms with oceans of baby oil. Over 28 days of testimony, federal prosecutors called witnesses who gave compelling accounts of harrowing violence, acts of intimidation, and voyeuristic sex in hotel rooms with oceans of baby oil. Sean Combs, they said, was the ringleader. Investigators detailed for the jury raids at Mr. Combs' mansions in Miami Beach and Los Angeles, where they carted away several AR-15 style guns and illicit narcotics. People who worked for Mr. Combs, the music mogul known as Puff Daddy or Diddy, testified that they had procured drugs for him or had witnessed his physical abuse of a former girlfriend. In the face of this evidence, the defense presented a case that lasted less than half an hour. Mr. Combs declined to testify, and no other witnesses were called. The rapid turnaround was startling after 6 weeks of trial. In retrospect, the defense's compact case was a sign that Mr. Combs' lawyers felt confident the government had not done enough to convince a federal jury that Mr. Combs was, as charged, the boss of a criminal enterprise. That confidence had appeared to waver on Tuesday afternoon, when 8 of Mr. Combs' lawyers somberly huddled near their client after jurors said they had reached a verdict on all but the racketeering charge. But those lawyers turned jubilant on Wednesday after the jury declared Mr. Combs not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy, the 2 most severe charges against him. And that story, there's a quote here from Mark Agnifilio, Mr. Combs' lead attorney. He fought for his innocence. That story continues on page A21. Let's see what else made the front page of the New York Times for today. Okay, there's one more story here. So the next story on the front page, loving homes wanted for rats and zebra fish. Okay, let's read that again. Loving homes wanted for rats and zebra fish. Adopt X-Lab animals, EPA asks staff. Employees at the Environmental Protection Agency's research campus in North Carolina are preparing to take on a new responsibility: bring home lab rats as pets, or maybe some zebrafish. Both animals have long been used at the EPA facility to test the toxicity of chemicals. But as the EPA shuts down its research arm as part of the Trump administration's deep cuts to government scientific work, the animals need new homes. So employees at the agency's sprawling research triangle park in North Carolina have set up an adoption plan, according to 4 people with knowledge of the program. Staff members can take home the rats or fish and keep them as pets. A quote, adopt love, save a life. Read a poster displayed on campus last week. That story can be found on page A20. Those are the stories making the front page. Now let's see what's happening in Okay, so in the international news, which you can find on pages A4 to 10, British royals retire train. It's the end of the line for private rail cars that have transported the monarchy for over 150 years. That story is on page A4. Low-level war in the making, low-level war in the making. Absent a U.S. deal with Iran, a long game of hide-and-seek punctuated by military action is likely. News analysis on page A10. And in the national news, which can be found on pages A14 to 21, next tests for Democrats. Adelita Grijalva is favored to win her late father's Arizona House seat, but youthful rivals and tired voters are asking why change is so hard. Page A4. That story is on page A14. ICE fears dampen celebrations. Some Los Angeles area communities canceled events over fears of raids as Latinos grapple with how and whether to mark Independence Day. That story is on page A19. And Mamdani fires back at Trump. The Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City said the president's criticism was an effort to divert attention from the GOP agenda. That story is on page A15. And in business news, which can be found on pages B1 to 5, at 21st Century Kodak moment, the company's name has become synonymous with a failure to adapt to the digital revolution, but overseas, its logo is a retro fashion statement. Page B1. That story can be found on page B1. Vietnam deal a swipe at China. An initial trade, according to the country, offers a glimpse of how President Trump is pushing the world to cut back on trade with Beijing. That story on page B1. South Korea's market fortunes. Analysts attribute the rise of the country's stocks mostly to the restoration of a unified government that has vowed to pass investor-friendly reforms. That story on page B1. Now in sports, soccer star dies in car crash. Diogo Jota, 28, who played for Liverpool and the Portuguese nation team, was killed along with his brother. That story is on page B11. Baseball's sweat signs, electrolyte packets, body cooling devices, plain old water. Players seek ways to cope with stifling heat. That story is on page B8. And weekend arts, Dolly before she was Dolly. Thornton Wilder's Matchmaker was transformed into a blockbuster musical, but it has virtues of its own. And that story is on page C1. A more romantic Vermeer. A freak exhibition unites three of the artist's works that explore letter writing and maybe love affairs. That story on page C1. And for the opinion pieces, you can find them on pages A24 to 25. Carlos Lozada. That story is on page A24. And those are the stories making the New York Times today. So now we go over to CARICOM to see what's happening in the Caribbean. All right. So let's see what's happening in the Caribbean today. So courtesy of CARICOM.org. So the first story that's making the headlines in CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community. This story was published on July 3, 2025. Japan and Colombia appoint new ambassadors to CARICOM. The governments of Japan and the Republic of Colombia have appointed new ambassadors to the Caribbean community, CARICOM. The accreditation ceremonies took place on Tuesday, July 1 at the CARICOM Secretariat in Georgetown, Guyana. CARICOM Secretary General accepted the letter of credence from the new ambassador of Japan to CARICOM, His Excellency, bear with me, Dr. Uezawa Akima, noting that the CARICOM Secretariat headquarters, and that story continues. You can go to the CARICOM.org. You can read more on that story as we're just going through the headlines. The next story making the headlines on CARICOM community, in the Caribbean community on CARICOM.org is, this was published on July 3, 2025. CARICOM, Palestine mark milestones in diplomatic relations. We strongly urge at the end of the illegal settlement of the occupied Palestinian territories, a clear violation of international law. The community's repeated message is clear. There must be an unconditional and sustained ceasefire, protection of civilians, and unimpeded humanitarian aid in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories. CARICOM Secretary General Dr. Carla Barnett on Tuesday, July 2, and that story continues. Another story published on July 3, 2025, CARICOM, IFC partner to spur green investments across English-speaking Caribbean. The Caribbean Community CARICOM Secretariat has welcomed an initiative of the CARICOM Committee of Central Bank Governors and the International Finance Corporation that will create a regional green finance taxonomy. The International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, announced the initiative last week, and that story also continues. Now, this story was published on July 1, 2025. Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness assumes chairmanship of CARICOM. Effective today, it reads, 1 July 2025, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, ON, PC, MP, Prime Minister of Jamaica, has formally assumed the chairmanship of the Caribbean Community CARICOM. As we prepare for the 49th regular meeting of the Conference of CARICOM Heads of Government, Prime Minister Holness has shared a message outlining his vision and priorities for the community, and that story also continues. Now, another story that made the headlines on July 1, 2025. Youth development through sport essential to securing region's future, says CARICOM DSG. It is also important to explore how the region's policymakers and development specialists can partner to exploit the untapped opportunities for securing positive educational outcomes, strengthening community development, and facilitating greater youth engagement through chess. Dr. Armstrong Alexis, Deputy Secretary General, CARICOM Deputy Secretary General Dr. Armstrong Alexis believes that participation in sports can unlock young people's potential, and that story also continues. Now, another story that made the headlines on July 1, 2025, and this is our final headline for today. Yes. Caribbean schools shine in 2025 Caribbean Lightning Safety Awareness Contest. The Caribbean Meteorological Organization, CMO, has announced the winner of the 2025 Caribbean Lightning Safety Awareness Contest, a regional initiative to boost public knowledge of lightning safety and first aid through creative expression by school children. 12 schools from across the Caribbean submitted entries showcasing outstanding creativity, accuracy, and inclusiveness in delivering vital safety messages, and that story also continues. We want to say thank you to CARICOM.org for these stories as we go on over to looking at what's making the headlines in Africa. Okay, so just in July 4, 2025, and credits go to africanews.com. Zambia ends cholera outbreak after weeks without new infections. From floods to famine, rainfall chaos fuels Africa's drought crisis. Togo, Amnesty International calls for end to use of force against protesters. Let's go down and see. Right. Former South African Deputy President David Mabuza dies at 64. That's a photo of him right there for those who are able to see. Fragile peace in Eastern DRC as M23 reacts cautiously to Kinshasa-Kigali Accord. Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwanda walks away, and this is one of the features. Oh, hang on, it's sliding. Okay, so this is sliding. So we have Cyber Africa Forum highlights Benin's bold digital resilience. That's Business Africa. And then we have AI drones lead breakthrough against malaria in Africa, Business Africa. Then we have Angola hosts US Africa Summit amid calls to revive trade ties, Business Africa again. And then Rwanda walks away. What's behind the Central Africa rift? Another in the business news. Okay. So in Tanzania's prime minister steps down ahead of election. That came in an hour ago. And in Togo, an hour ago as well, Amnesty International calls for end of use of force against protesters. European Union President, Denmark backs Ukraine's EU membership quest. That's 43 minutes ago. Portugal, Gondomar mourns. Funeral of Diogo Jota and Andre Silva scheduled for Saturday. That came in 2 hours ago. That was updated. Climate change. World will have to learn to live with heat waves, UN says. And I just want to play the video that's featured at the very. So I want to share this video that's featured at on the story. Oh, it's not. Okay.
Our world is filled with rhythm. That
climate change is intensifying water scarcity across Africa while also exacerbating droughts. Despite a brief uptick in rainfall across the continent, critical water shortages persist. The diminishing rainfall over the past year has triggered severe ecological, economic, and humanitarian impacts. This trend is projected to continue.
We had very beautiful forests, very beautiful wetlands, but because of several pressures, these areas were all degraded. By the time I grew up, at least I saw there was already cane, but the swamps were intact, the rivers were intact. We used to have rain washers every day at 2. At certain time we should be having rain, but and then there was to be more rain. You'd find we have very few months of no rain.
Africa's average surface temperatures have risen steadily across all regions, with Southern Africa experiencing the highest increases. Rainfall patterns are becoming increasingly unpredictable, with the Sahel experiencing more rainfall recently, while Central and Southern Africa are facing significant drying trends.
Climate crisis is a human rights crisis. Rising temperatures, rising seas, floods, droughts, and wildfires threaten our rights to life, to health, to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and much more. And the heat wave that we are currently experiencing indeed leads us to the adaptability measures that are absolutely necessary, because otherwise, again, rights would be impacted as a result.
Sea levels along Africa's coast have risen to approximately 20 centimeters since 1900 and are projected to increase by an additional 35 to 50 centimeters by 2050, posing a threat to coastal communities. Extreme weather events, including heat waves, droughts, and floods, have increased. This has all been blamed on the continuous use of fossil fuels.
We need to move away from fossil fuels much faster and completely if we want to avoid ever more extreme events that also will reach the limits of what societies are able to adapt to.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Tune in every Friday at 8 a.m. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in the pulse. Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the city speaks loudest. Start your Friday mornings plugged into the heartbeat of the world. Urban Pulse Global is your 8 a.m. power surge, curating today's top stories from the New York Times, the Caribbean via CARICOM.org, and Africa via AfricaNews.com. One podcast, 3 continents, all the pulse. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Goodbye.